After 6 weeks, 10 matches, 8 wins, and 2 defeats, the Lions' time in Australia has come to an end. And on today's show, we are going to review the good and the bad of the 2025 tour to Australia. I'm Will Slattery. A happy bank holiday weekend to everybody, and I'm delighted to be joined for the last time in Australia by our man down under, Ruaidhri O'Connor, who's about to catch his flight home. So we really are getting the last bit of juice out of your Rud.
Yeah, no, I've been Sydney Airport, as you can probably see if you're on YouTube, and probably hear in the background a few announcements and stuff are happening. But yeah, the sun finally came out in Sydney today. It's been a pretty miserable week. It was kind of everyone was ready to go home because the weather had been so bad. It was nice to get a little bit of look at the harbour and see the kind of Opera House for one last time this afternoon. But yeah, it's time to go home. It's been a long old trip. It's been a lot of fun, and it's been interesting, and at times very good, and at times a bit middling, but on the whole, a great experience to travel around Australia for the last couple of weeks. And yeah, today, one by one, the WhatsApp group has been people saying goodbye and heading off, and none of us know who'll be back in 4 years' time. And we saw off a few kind of people who were retiring the other night, and we toasted some absent friends from Lions tours previous, and they're really special experiences. Lions tours, like covering them, it's one of the real career highlights, and it's been great. I mean, Australia is an amazing place to cover rugby, and even just listening to a couple of fans chatting there, they're already planning their trip back here in 2 years' time for the World Cup. A couple of English people were already kind of planning where they'll base themselves and all that sort of stuff. So it's been great, but yeah, time to go home.
Yeah, it's funny. I saw Stephen Jones wishing you a fond farewell on Twitter. I'd say a lot of people would like to be at that dinner to see all the opinions flying around from the various rugby journalists from around the UK and Ireland. Rud, what I'm marveling at is that you've been an all singing, all dancing rugby correspondent with videos with Sydney Harbour Bridge in the background, loads of podcasts. Why couldn't we get the one right in the Aviva Stadium on the opening night? It took us 3 attempts and we couldn't get it off the ground. And since then, you've just been seamlessly doing everything.
Well, your entire question took place while an announcement was being made, and then you stopped just as the announcement finished. That is unbelievable. That malfunction still gives me nightmares. That night, like that was the night we nearly fell out because in fairness, it was my fault. I didn't know how to use the equipment, and we didn't do a very good job. We had the wrong cable, wasn't it? But we got there in the end, and we haven't had too many malfunctions. Touch wood. Since then, so hopefully we get through this last one, and then we don't. Well, we'll see each other because we live basically 100 meters away from each other, but we'll see each other in different circumstances. But we won't have to record any more podcasts, and I'd say some of the listeners would be happy for that as well.
Yeah, well, look, that's why it was, I suppose, the game on home soil to iron out any kinks. Like the Lions got their defeat and then they went on and won the series. So similarly, we got that kind of out of the way and you were able to hit the ground running in Australia. Just before we kick into the chat, though, a reminder that our rugby coverage in Indo Sport is brought to you by Energia. Energia sponsors rugby in Ireland at all levels at grassroots with the Energia AIL and is the official energy partner to Leinster, Connacht and the Irish men's and women's teams. The Energia Rugby for All initiative supports inclusion, welcoming everyone of all abilities to participate in the game. To learn more about Energia's rugby partnerships and find out about their exclusive home energy offer for rugby fans, you can visit energia.ie/rugby. Rod, it's fitting that I'm talking to you just as you're flying home because you came into the studio just before you flew out to Australia and we previewed the test series and some of the talking points we thought were going to be big over the following 6 weeks. And now that it's kind of all played out, the Lions 2-1 series winners, you know, everyone's flying home. The men's rugby game will go into hibernation for a couple of weeks as the Women's World Cup comes into focus. Has it matched up with what you thought before going over there? Like, I feel like the second test was maybe the big outlier that we hadn't envisaged, like this gladiatorial contest that really felt like, say, like South Africa 2009 almost, in some of its physicality and some of its drama. But some of the other things, I suppose, the Lions maybe taking a 2-0 series lead, the warm-up game was maybe not hitting the heights, you know, on paper. It didn't look likely that they would. And Joe Schmidt's ability to coach a team up to muddy the waters and to get things close, I suppose that was kind of fairly well signposted. So how have you found what you ended up watching and covering versus what you maybe thought going over?
Yeah, I have no recollection of what we said in that preview pod, so I can't remember what my expectations were, really. I think we all knew that it was going to be a bit different because the Lions were seen as being a much stronger collection of players than the Australian teams that they were coming up against, and the Wallabies included in that the Lions, well, like Ireland have been here recently and won a series, and 7 years ago, but still, and you'd back Ireland if they were here this summer to win a series. Similarly, England have won a couple of series down here in recent years, and England actually swept Australia a couple of years ago. Like, I think Scotland would have a decent chance down here. I wouldn't give Wales much of hope, but they were competitive against Australia last year when Schmidt took over. So that was always part of it, and that always was a nagging doubt over this Lions series, that Lions tour, and up until the first whistle in Melbourne at the MCG, that it kind of played out. It had been underwhelming. Look, it's been a lot of fun for a lot of people, and that shouldn't be lost. I think that's lost when you're at home a little bit. Like 500,000 people went to the Lions games in Australia on this tour. That may include the Argentina game, but it's hell of a lot of people. Now, a lot of them went to a few of them. 500,000 people attended the games that the Lions played in 2025, which is a remarkable figure. And the crowds were huge. The traveling crowd was very big. There was a lot of expats and people who were based here from all four nations. A lot of Irish people went to the games. And yes, the Brisbane game was a bit of a disaster because Lions were so much stronger than the Wallabies. But the MCG kind of changed everything because it was such a good game of rugby. And I think in time, we will look back on this. This whole thing will be remembered for that one game, and maybe the Sydney game as well, because it was so unusual. And you wonder whether that game will go down as a turning point, or those two games as a turning point for Australian rugby. And the sadness or the kind of disappointment or frustration is that they didn't produce that in the first test because they were too nice. The whole tour was too nice until First Nations Pacific rolled up in the Marvel Stadium in Melbourne, and Tanya Tupou just said, "Feck this," and started carrying the ball at the Lions. The Salakai Lotto started, there was a couple of scraps that night, and Owen Farrell was getting stuck in. And you're like, this is exactly what this tour has been missing for the whole thing. And we thought they might get it off AUNZ the week before. They didn't. The Word did a little bit of it in Sydney when Charlie Gamble went to town on the Lions breakdown, but they'd kind of sailed through, and it had all been very nice, and they hadn't really made a dent. And Australia really were indifferent towards them. The whole thing was like, you kind of got the sense the NRL and the AFL where everyone was still watching that, and they were kind of, the fact that even one of the games, the Brumbies game, went up against State of Origin, like that's a disaster, and how that happened. So you're like looking at all these things, and you're kind of going, this is just, it's going to pass by, and then you get this belter of a game, like an absolute classic. Won in the way that it was won, and then the controversy, and suddenly it's on the back pages and everyone's talking about it, and they sold it. Like the game in Sydney wasn't sold out until after the MCG game, and the Australians came out pretty much in their droves for that game. That was the biggest amount of gold we saw in any of the stadiums for the three tests by a mile, and the atmosphere was way more engaged, way more passionate. They were kind of everything you want from an Australian crowd, but the thing was over. Even like it just happened in reverse, really. Like, you had two dominant tests from either team and one belter, and it finished 2-1. And like, I don't think this Lions team really deserved to be seen as a great team, even if they went 3-0. So the fact that it didn't go 3-0 probably just was about their level. And they produced some great moments and great flurries and a great first half and a great second half and a brilliant comeback in that second half. But they never put together in 80 minutes, or they never really were the dominant force that I think Andy Farrell pictured them being when he set out on tour. And that, I think, will disappoint them. And yeah, they've won a series, which Lions, like, that cannot be underestimated as an achievement, because the Lions teams don't do that. And even you can write Australia off, but we think we saw the quality of player that Australia have in the second and third test. We just hadn't seen it for a while. And I think this Australian team will grow from here and get better. But yeah, it was an unsatisfying way to win it in a way, even if the MCG kind of rescued it a little bit.
In a roundabout way, I actually think losing on Saturday is a good thing for this Lions team's legacy. I think if they had won 3-0 and had like dominated in the way you're envisaging, I actually think they would have gotten less credit, bizarrely, maybe in some ways, because it would have been seen as like a really substandard challenge. I think the fact that like they won 2-0 and had to scrap for it in Australia really did turn up for the back half of the series in the long run actually will make us remember this series a good bit more, I think, than if the Lions had won in a fairly perfunctory manner, maybe of the first half of the first test.
I disagree. I think if they'd weren't turn up and all the three games had been like Brisbane and they'd blown away the Wallabies 3 times, that would have been, everyone would have just gone. They would have celebrated and said we're a great team, and at first, like, Lions don't, like, it's hard to sweep a series. So like, it would have been, you can't dismiss it as an achievement. But if it had been 3 comfortable games in the manner of Brisbane, we all would have shrugged our shoulders and moved on. It wasn't us that said they had to win. Well, I think I did right, they had to win 3-0, but it was them that came out and said they set the standard for themselves as we have to win 3-0. They said it the first moment they met in London.
Just to come in on this, Rud, do you think is this a case of Henry Pollock letting slip publicly And then the
No,
lads having to back it up, like, because
no.
I heard that Mario Itoje was then asked about it, and he obviously isn't going to say no. I feel like Henry Pollock might have just let something slip, and then it became
Well,
this big public thing.
well, well. The first time they met in London, Andy Farrell said we want to win every game, including the Argentina game, and obviously that went by the wayside, so they had to recalibrate. But Ben Earl said they wanted to be seen as the greatest Lions team ever, and that was a couple of days before Henry Pollock came out and said what he said. Excuse me, and Itoje backed him obviously, and then it was kind of on the record, and they said it. But Farrell said we don't back away from this. This is what we want to achieve. So I like if they come out of the MCG and put away Australia with a really dominant 80-minute performance, playing Andy Farrell rugby, the kind of rugby that led to that Hugo Keenan try, the kind of peak Ireland, like to draw a team. I know it's a very Ireland heavy team, but to draw a team together with like a couple players from Scotland, Wales, and England, not a lot of them, but a few of them, and put together that cohesion and that kind of multi-phase attack that we saw in that second half. That is a coaching achievement, because most Lions coaches, or most coaches who get the Lions job, like Gatland, they go, right, this is too. Let's not overcomplicate this. Let's just run them over. And Farrell went for a much more ambitious playing style, and we saw it in Dublin. Like it was thrilling at times in the first half in that Argentina game, and there was moments where it was thrilling, and it won them the game in the MCG. But ironically, actually going direct last Saturday would have possibly got them closer to winning the game in the third test. But if they'd done it that way, I think it would have been a really impressive achievement to come out of the MCG, and in what was a dead rubber, and go and beat Australia in style. Would have been fantastic. Like, I think would have been really. I think that would have, maybe that set them apart, but it would have been a something that no Lions team has ever really done, to go 3-0 and play a really ambitious brand of rugby. And yes, the Wallabies
in that scenario, the team as a whole would be remembered greater, but I feel like the series as a whole would be remembered less. That's more what I'm getting at, I suppose. Like, obviously, if they'd won well on Saturday, we would have thought of the team more highly. I mean, more as a kind of a in 15 years time, we might look back and I think we'll remember this series maybe a little fonder than if they had just won well.
Yeah. Well, Australia's credibility definitely. Australia's strength made it more credible. Absolutely. But if the Lions still had scope to win that game, having been bullied for 45 minutes in the way that they did in the MCG, and they just kind of died withered on the vine, kind of insipidly. They just didn't look like they just ever backed up the talk. They looked like they were ready for we saw them in the dressing room on their phones. Like they were done. Mario Itoje flew home on Sunday. They didn't stay and celebrate for a couple of days, which they always do. They'd done that last week. So I think they just didn't back up their words. But that's not to diminish what the Wallabies did on Saturday. And the if onlys are, Valentini doesn't do his calf in the week of the Fiji game, and Skelton doesn't come in with a calf strain, and Taniela Tupou loses Joe Schmidt's trust, and he doesn't back Dylan Peach, and he doesn't play his team enough in the build-up. And because if that Wallabies team that we saw on Saturday brought that level of ferocity to the first test instead of the last test, then we would have had an epic series. And there's absolutely no guarantee that the Lions would have won it. Like the Lions did lose players as well, and I think they missed Joe McCarthy, and that's kind of been under analyzed a little bit. Like, I think McCarthy kind of gives you a bit of a bulwark against Skelton, and he hurt his foot in the first game, and he came off, and like, they didn't have Caelan Doris, who would have started all three tests had he been fit. Not that Jack Conan let them down, but so there was, and obviously they lost big players in that final test, and that didn't help either, including their captain. But it just, 2-1 against this Australian team coming over, like, having stated what they stated. I think it's a good, like, they're a good Lions team, not a great Lions team, and it's kind of what I expected out of them in the first place anyway.
Yeah, and like 2-0 lead is the key part as well. Like at 2-0 up, the third test was always going to be kind of depending on how they rocked up, what team was picked, how they prepared, and all that. Yeah, like the Australian preparation is like the big blunder for me of the tour. Arguably, was Australia only playing one warm-up game. Like, it took them a game and a half to really start finding their feet, and as well as Joe Schmidt did it coaching the team up, as we saw over the course of the series, like his selection, which, even when he was going well with Ireland, people would often quibble with his selections. Like number 9, like Nick White was brilliant at the weekend. even Tate McDermott was quite impactful when he came in, and he's Tom Line's clubmate. So like he makes a kind of a risky decision at 10 with a young, unproven guy in Tom Line. You think maybe he might marry that with his clubmate to give him a little more solidity there, but he didn't do that. Jake Gordon, obviously, his box kicking is his strength, but they never really got much change in that area, really. So that was a question mark. Angus Bell was left on the bench the whole series. He's one of their big, powerful ball carriers. Harry Potter on the wing over Dylan Peach looked like a real bad decision by the end of it when Peach looked so good at the weekend. Like, people will be familiar with Harry Potter from his time with Leicester, a good, solid Premiership player. But the idea that he was starting an Alliance test, I think, caught a lot of people off guard. And we'll never know how fit Skelton was week one or Valentini was week one. Obviously, Valentini ended up re-injuring his calf at halftime and didn't play. So it's hard to know exactly. But that first test was so insipid that, like, and the impact Skelton made thereafter. Like, I would have rather have him in 1 and 2 and leave 3 where the chips fall where they may if the series is still alive than maybe hold him out in the hope that it goes to test 3 because it didn't materialize like that. So as good as Schmidt did in some areas, Rudd, I do think some of the planning and the selection, in particular not having that second warm-up game, which, to be fair, we flagged before the series even started, like that was kind of curious. I think there's a couple of things they'll have big regrets too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's all valid. I think if you were talking to Joe, he'd tell you that Max Jorgensen scored try in the first test in Brisbane in the first half came from a box kick. But and Gordon was very good in the second test in that first 50 minutes. And he does see McDermott as a guy who can come in a la Owen Redden with Ireland and change the tempo after. It's kind of a Conor Murray, Owen Redden kind of combination, and that's how he sees it. I don't necessarily agree with it, but that's the way it's been explained to me. Like even Lucan Salakailotto, he played against the Lions 3 times in the build up to the Test series, for the Western Force, for the Reds, for AUNZ, and for First Nations Pacifica. And by the time he played for the First Nations Pacifica, he was absolutely cleaning people out. Like and he was kind of in and out of the squad beforehand, and like if you bring him on for Will Skelton after 50 minutes in the second test, and you bring his power, I think that makes a difference. And I just think he backed his more technical players over his more athletic players at times. And I think the key to beating an Irish heavy Lions team, as we know, is to pick size and pick Will Skelton is a good start, but pick size and try and dominate them physically. And even the way Nick White got in Dan Sheehan's head on Saturday and was going at him the whole time and chipping away. That's Australia. That's what you expect of an Australian team at home. Like you think of, the running battle between Austin Healy and the big second row. His name is Justin Harrison. Yeah, like he's been on TV here every day. I don't know how I've forgotten his name. Justin Harrison and the niggle of that series, and even the niggle in 2013. It was just that was so absent until it was too late. And like they'll look at it if they go and kick on and they win the Rugby Championship or compete really well in the Rugby Championship and take a Bledisloe, like the All Blacks are dropping like flies, they'll probably be happy with how the Lions has gone now. But like we frame it as everything, or certainly the players and the Lions frame it as everything. But Joe Schmidt was framing this as almost like a development tour at times, which is a bit self-preservation-y, but it kind of felt that way sometimes. And that is the disappointing thing, that the fire came just too late. Had the Tizano decision gone the other way, and it very much could have done, we would have had some week in Sydney last week. Oh, imagine the drama of a test series being in the balance during a lightning break. I guarantee you they wouldn't have been on their phones and sitting in beanbags. The fact that even Schmidt had a lightning plan, we didn't get to talk about that on Saturday. He had a lightning plan. Wow, that's the ultimate Joe Schmidt flex.
Oh yeah,
he was delighted to talk. I asked him about it because it was the captain, Harry Wilson, brought it up, and I asked Joe about it, and his eyes lit up at the opportunity to talk us through having 4 balls and a lot of bikes. Like this was Joe in his element, but he was so miserable after that first test. He just looked like a beaten docket, and by the end he was being asked, would you not just go on to the World Cup? Like, because, this is how these things change. And his team looked like a real force, but it was just too late for this series. And that's just going to nag at me it won't nag at me for long because I'm going on holidays, but like it'll nag away at your sense of this series and this tour. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd say his eyes didn't light up often when you asked him questions when he was the Ireland coach. So it must be a rarity that he was pleased to see your hand being raised. But I had
Ah,
the same
yeah.
thought. Had the same thought when he said that. Like I'm just picturing him like those old school filing cabinets. He just like pulls it out, goes to L, lightning, and then like just takes out like a little binder and is like, "Now, lads, this is what we've been training our whole lives for." But it's funny you raised the point about the World Cup. Like now it just seems ripe with possibilities. I know he has like a family situation and he doesn't want to commit long term, but if they can maintain this rate of progression, and him and Les Kiss have a good relationship, like even if he goes back in the New Zealand 2023 role where he's kind of like a senior assistant, and maybe he takes a step back for a period, Les gets his feet under the desk, and Joe goes back in before the World Cup. I think that could definitely be a runner if they can keep going. You're right about the self-preservation. He comments like, I think that was bullshit. I think if they were more competitive going into it, he wouldn't have been saying it. But 2 weeks and then the first rugby championship game is so quick. I don't remember it being that quick before. Maybe my mind, I just don't remember, but I don't remember it being quite so hot in the heels, which is a little disappointing. But I suppose that it's a very compact schedule these days. Where do I want to go to next? Like, obviously, 2-0 series win, or like 2-0 to clinch the series, 2-1 overall. Like, what do you think Andy Farrell's biggest call he got right was? Like, for me, the biggest decision of the series was starting Ty Burn and Tom Curry. I think if he goes with what was, I suppose, the prevailing wisdom, quote unquote, before that, and leaves those guys out, or at least leaves Ty Burn out because Tom Curry had kind of been signposted, don't think they win the series, to be honest, or certainly a hell of a lot closer if it could have even been closer. That's one of his great selection decisions. And I struggle to think of a more vindicated one of like a guy or two guys in this sense being picked when they really weren't in form and then delivering so handsomely on the biggest stage. They were probably the two best players across the test series for the Lions. Both of them had major question marks. Like that's going to be the thing I think I'll remember most from this series, to be honest, is Andy Farrell kind of trusting, not his gut, but kind of backing his innate sense of selection, which he often gets right. And the two guys having absolute stormers throughout 3 games.
Yeah, I like it's hard to come up with a better option because it was so defining, and I always expected Byrne to get in there somehow because like he was all like I think there would have been 12 Irish starters in the second test had it not been for injury. He was always going to lean heavily into his core. This is partly, like it or not, this is partly a 2027 recce. Like this is part of he wanted to win a series, but he also wanted to bring on give his players a big experience going there, and like he didn't do it with Josh Van der Fleer. So if he really felt the selection was the right one, he went with he obviously rates Tom Curry so highly, and Curry was the one coming into it that I was like, I'm just not sure because he hadn't played well at all. Byrne had kind of played his way into form. He captained them against the AUNZ that night. I know that was a bit of a it was a crap game, and AUNZ didn't really turn up in Adelaide, but Byrne played well that night. And you just thought he's probably done enough, at least to get onto the bench. But God, did they deliver? And like he just pushed their buttons. That element of it as well. That Ty Byrne happily, like Curry wouldn't give anything more than a one-word answer in his post-match interview that night because he just the way Andy Farrell framed it is like everyone in the media, all the fans don't think you should be in the team. Now, I didn't hear one person in the media saying it was a controversial decision. I think everyone said they haven't been informed, but they're all big game players. But what Andy Farrell does, and what happens a lot, is that they take social media, they whip it up into the same thing, and then we bear the brunt when we try to ask them questions. But Ty Byrne gave a much more effusive interview, and basically Andy Farrell channeled Joe Schmidt to Rob Carney in Chicago, saying, "Look, you need a big one here today. Everyone thinks you shouldn't be in this team." And like for Byrne, the player of the series, in the end of it, he talked about it on a Saturday night. That stung him. He believed it. He read the comments. He was getting notifications into his phone. I mean, he needs to figure out his notification settings because he doesn't need to get randomers. Like there's ways of avoiding that. But he was getting notifications, and I'm sure his family were talking to him about it as well because that's another way that the kind of bubble gets burst by. I think people send screenshots into the players' family groups, and the players can't avoid it. But they were fired up, and like it was utterly vindicated. And it wasn't just vindicated once because you wondered whether they could go to the well again, and they did. They went to they were the
Three
most
times.
consistent. Yeah,
Yeah. They were
they were
arguably top three performers all three test matches. Ty Burn played 80 minutes 3 weekends in a row.
yeah, yeah, um, yeah. It was the most deserved and clear cut player of the series. I know there was two player of the series, and Finn Russell somehow got voted the Howden player of the series in a data collection exercise that was presented as the player of the series on Sky Sports. But there was only one player of the series, really. Like, Russell was good, but he had a terrible third test, and he wasn't as influential as Ty Byrne. So, yeah, and like, what an achievement for him. You know, you can't underestimate how life-changing this is for Hugo Keenan and Ty Byrne in particular, Furlong as well. They'll be out here in 4 years. They'll be in New Zealand in 4 years' time. They'll be dining on this for a long time, and that's the kind of reward that you get as when you do go and do something special with the Lions. It's bigger than Ireland in that way, because you're in bigger markets. You're getting bigger audiences. You know, you're gonna, like, the corporate element of it is it's huge.
Rud, obviously Ty Byrne player of the series. You were writing today about the Irish guys, and you kind of ranked them. It's kind of been a strange tour insofar as, obviously, Ireland were very prominent in the Test team. They won this series. But if you spin through some guys, I've just written them down here. Like, the guys who really hit their straps, you'd say Ty Byrne, Gibson Park, Jack Conan, Dan Sheehan, and Tyke Furlong, who were like kind of consistently close to their top level. Hugo Keenan really grew into the series as it went along. But then after that, it gets a little mixed. Like, James Lowe started the first two tests, then got dropped. He never really found his best form, was quite inconsistent, had some big moments, but then also had some errors. Andrew Porter ended up starting test 2 and 3. I honestly think it was a really baffling decision that Ellis Genge was relegated to the bench. He was one of the best players in test 1, had a huge impact in test 2 off the bench. And I thought it was a rotationary thing, and he might come back in for test 3, but Andy Farrell kind of went with him. That's like one decision that if I was like a non-Irish person, I'd be like, that really doesn't make sense to me. Sorry, even as an Irish person, it doesn't make sense. But I'm just saying, if I was from in the UK press pack, say, I might have an issue with that. Van der Fleer obviously ended up not playing at all in the test, despite having a fairly solid tour. Like James Ryan, Bundy Aki, Ronan Kelleher were all very influential in test 2, but had kind of a mixed test series besides that. And like in Ryan's case, a mixed tour. Obviously, Joe McCarthy, great first half of first test. Obviously, was injured the rest of the series. Matt Hansen and Ringrose injuries kept him out of the entire test series. Like, so that's kind of a strange, like, kind of gamut of guys. Some of them who were at their best throughout. Some of them who had key moments, but were maybe a bit mixed. And some guys who never really got a look in for various reasons. So coming back at the end of the summer, like, some guys will have much more of a pep in their step than others. Obviously, they'll all celebrate, but some of the guys won't be happy with how their tour went.
Yeah, and it always goes that way to a degree. I mean, I would put Ringrose in the first bracket. I thought he was absolutely brilliant here.
Well, just in terms of missing the series, like,
I know, but in terms of, like, just hitting their straps and delivering, like, he can have no disappointment about the way he played here. Like, he was nailed on to start all the tests. He was Hugh Jones did well, but Ringrose was so far the best outside centre in Australia. Like, even better than Sue Leahy. He looked like this was going to be a career moment for him, and it's such a shame that it was taken away from him in the way that it was. Much like the game wasn't going great for James Ryan, but God, that's a sickening moment for him. And both of them have a history. Like, you don't want to overdo it on them because you're not their doctor, and we don't exactly know the detail of it. But like, James Ryan has had to take time out of his career to get his head right, and for him to be knocked out for a couple of minutes, that's a terrible way for his Lions experience to end. You're right. Some of them were patchy and didn't get to their levels. Porter, he's a different player to Genge. He doesn't stand out in the same way. I thought he had a good, solid second test without being brilliant. But I don't know. If you're in the same position as a fella who's flying like Genge, do you lose a bit of belief and a little confidence in that scenario? He played a big role in a test series win for the Lions, and Ronan Kelleher played loads of games, but the line-out kind of fell apart when he came on in the first test, and the scrum wasn't great he got Simbin in the third test, but he'll always have Melbourne, like a lot of them do. Keenan had a mad tour, like, he was sick for so long, and it looked like he was not going to be nowhere near the test after he lost all that weight, and then Kinghorn did his knee against the Brumbies, and he ends up being the hero. And he was really good, I thought, on Saturday, except for that one kick that he put out in the full, which kind of halted any chance of a Lions comeback. But it was kind of that, everyone had a couple of mistakes in them. Like, Aki had a mad tour, but then you find out that his wife gave birth in a car on the day of the Brisbane game. Sure, it's no wonder he was inconsistent. His head must have been everywhere. And Porter as well. Like, Porter left a newborn child back in Dublin and hasn't seen his newborn, except over a phone for 6 weeks. You can't underestimate how that affects a fella's performance.
Could you explain the Bundy Aki story for people who might not have seen it? Yeah, I saw reading it today. It's a mad turn of events that his wife gave birth to a daughter, Anya, while like in kind of very dramatic circumstances.
Yeah, like it. This is a story I don't think we were supposed to find out about until the post-tour documentary. So Bundy Aki comes into the mix zone, which is the interview area after which follows the press conferences. The last interviews we got with any Lions players. And a week previously, Jack Conan had told us about the Katie Taylor video, and I suspect he wasn't supposed to mention that either. But Aki comes in, and I haven't got to talk to Bundy Aki that much in the last couple of years. He doesn't do a lot of media with Ireland, but he was in good form. Shook all our hands, kind of was kind of admitted that the game hadn't gone well for him, but that he was delighted with how he'd really, like you could see in that Ultimate Test documentary they put out, he's really been at the heart of all of the fun and games and a real character in the squad, and he'd embraced it. So we chatted about that, and we chatted about the bizarre dressing room stuff and just the delayed lightning delay, and kind of got some information about that, and we were kind of, it was going grand. And then he mentioned, someone asked him, I think, how would he go on to the World Cup? Would this encourage you to go on? Jerry Tourney asked him, and he kind of went, we'll see. Like, I just want to have a break and get back to my family. I need to meet my unborn. Not my unborn. I need to meet my newborn child. And we all went, what? And we all tell us more. And he kind of said, yeah, my wife had a baby called Anya in the last around the Brisbane game, and she's doing well and it's healthy, but I haven't got to meet her yet, and I'm really looking forward to doing that. And then Tom English from the BBC asked, God, that must be hard for you. And he said, well, look, it's all credit to my wife. She's a very strong woman. It's a funny story, actually. And then he stopped and he looked at the media manager, and we all leaned in and going, okay, if you got to tell a story to tell us, or it's an interesting story, you got a story to tell us more. And he looked at the media manager again, and he looked at him again, and then he went, feck it, I'm going to tell them. So yeah, he was preparing on the day of the game, the first test in Brisbane, and he gets a phone call from his wife. Her waters are broken, and the way he said, he goes, okay, grand. And then she hangs up, and he's like, okay, she's going to the hospital, and she's on her way to the hospital, and she calls him again, and he's like, what's going on? And basically the baby's has arrived in the car on the way to the hospital. She's still 30 or 40 minutes away, and the first time he sees his newborn baby is in the back of a car somewhere in New Zealand, and he's looking down the edge of a phone, or the other end of a phone, and he's obviously emotional, and then he has a chat, and she gets off the hospital. He hangs up, and he goes out and plays 30 minutes off the bench in a test match against Australia. Amazing stuff. Like, I know this happens sometimes. Jeff Parling didn't go home for the birth of his child in the 2013 tour, and Ryan O'Driscoll played for Ireland the day his first daughter was born in around 2013 or 14, around that time of his career. But for him to not be in the country and to go out and play, and
Rod, we both done a bit of a location change. I think yours was because, did a flight arrive from parts unknown? Was it?
No, I'm kind of in a departures area, and an entire flight to Haneda just started queuing right behind my laptop. So it was just quite bustly. So I've gone to another corner of the airport, which looks like it's a bit calmer. I'm not even sure where Haneda is.
It's Tokyo. It's one of the airports in Tokyo.
Yes, I've been through that airport. That's another trip.
Yeah, one of your many tours. Rod, I just want to ask you a little bit off topic. I was reading a piece from your colleague Alex Lowe in the UK Times last week, and he said that R360 was the talk of the Sydney Test Week. This kind of mooted breakaway league. Mike Tyndall is involved. There's big money apparently. They want to have franchises playing in global cities and make them big events with concerts and all this hustle and bustle. And he was intimating that it's really gaining traction, like talks are taking place. And I'm just curious if you've heard anything about it, or how much validity there is to the idea that this is going to get off the ground. It seems completely pie in the sky to me, just reading the details. I just can't for the life of me see how that would ultimately work and gain huge traction. But I'm just from the outside looking in and reading some reports. What's your sense of this as a possibility, or how seriously it's being taken?
It's been taken very seriously. I've spoken to senior IRFU officials who have been formulating a policy over it for the last couple of weeks, and it was it's real. It's happening to a degree. It's obviously, we're still a long way off players decamping to New York for an extravaganza of rugby followed by an Ariana Grande concert, which is the vision that they have, and in front of sold out stadiums. I mean, we're trying to launch the Nations Cup for next year, and they still haven't announced that. So if they manage to get this off the ground successfully, it'd be some achievement. Like there's more than 100 players signed up. None of them are Irish, as far as I'm aware. The Irish players have all snubbed it so far. I think they're adopting a wait and see approach, which is kind of fair enough for a concept this. But the money is very good. And if it does get off the ground, because apparently the people behind Man United and the people behind Liverpool have invested, and Red Bull are apparently interested, although they've just bought Newcastle. So I don't know, Newcastle Falcons, who I think are going to be Newcastle Red Bulls next season. So I don't know how that marries up to their strategy. It does seem very real. I think it's going to be kind of Japanese players. It's going to be a lot of South Africans who are just happy to earn good money playing rugby and play fewer games, because that's one of the attractions for the players. It's very well paid and there's fewer games in the schedule, and they're still going to protect the test match windows, which is attractive for nations who could get some of their biggest earners off their books, but also have them playing. And it was an 18. No, it's fewer than that. It's a short enough season. So it's obviously going to affect, if it takes off, the club game in probably mostly in the UK, because I think the French league is so strong and has such a good financial deal that it'll hold its own for now, at least. But even if you're a South African playing in France and this thing is on the table, it's going to be more attractive because you're playing a lot fewer games. So it's as far as I'm aware, as far as I've been told, and talking to fairly senior figures in the game, and even Alan Gilpin, the CEO of World Rugby, was talking about it last week. The Lions CEO was saying he hasn't heard from the R360 in the build up to this tour, and hasn't had any discussions about how the Lions would fit into it all. So there is the senior figures within the game, the CEOs and stuff, are talking about this. There will be World Rugby meetings all of last week around the Lions tour. The last game of the series, there was World Rugby meetings all week. They kind of were doing World Cup stuff around the World Cup in Australia, but this has been front and center of all those discussions. It's the World Rugby have spoken to R360 about, because I think they kind of need to license it and give them their blessing. And it's whether the unions that make up World Rugby see it as a positive or a negative. They see it as more money coming into the game potentially, but I agree with you. The actual concept of this kind of Formula One style thing doesn't make any sense to me and the way I consume sports. But I'm 42, and one thing about the Lions during this tour that was very clear was this is a very old fan base. It was a lot of baby boomers spending their retirement money on a trip to Australia, and I think rugby is trending to an older audience, and Mike Tyndall and these people who are behind this are seeing this as an opportunity to try and get a much younger audience into the game with a new concept and follow stars. And again, like, I'm just out of touch with that whole world, and I struggle to see it taking off, but serious people are talking about it as if it's a serious thing, and it's not like some of the other concepts that we've heard about before, like the rugby 10s and stuff, which never got off the ground.
I guess I can somewhat see like the guys who were in Japan obviously being tempted to this league, because like they're playing in a league at the moment that doesn't have a huge amount of traction globally, and it's a lighter schedule in Japan. It's not as physically taxing. So I suppose theoretically there's a cohort of big name star players there who are kind of ripe for the picking. But yeah, like the idea, as you said, of a full house in New York watching a rugby match between two random franchises and then an Ariana Grande concert afterwards sounds like a kind of something you'd come up with a whiteboard in a marketing meeting. But I just don't.
Well, the money's going to be very good, so that's going to be attractive off the bat. Like they're being promised now. Whether they get paid is another thing, but the offer on the table, like there's people they're talking about €1 million contracts.
But how is that? How that's crazy. Like how on earth?
Apparently investors have already put money on the table. So the teams, they've already got people signed up to run teams. Again, like, I mean, this is the kind of discussion we were having about people were having about Live Golf a couple of years ago, and that got off the ground, and it has not. No one watches it, as far as, like, I'm not a golf fan. You could talk to Joe about the success of Live Golf, but if the money's good and there's fewer games than you have to play in France, and you're still allowed to play for your country, and you're a 29-year-old, why wouldn't you go and play in this thing? Like, yeah. The risk is that it falls apart and you don't get paid. But even if that happens, you're probably going to get picked up by one of your clubs. But even one of the things I think the RFU were discussing was kind of like the old days with rugby league. If you go to that league, will we have you back? You know, like, are you done which I think would be an extreme position to take, especially if this thing is real. and I don't think it'll happen. But they're also talking about going after kind of NRL stars and people like Kalen Ponga, who wouldn't be a big name in Ireland, but is a huge name here in Australia. He plays in State of Origin, was an unbelievably talented rugby union player. He probably would have been playing 10 for the Wallabies in the Lions series had he not gone to league. And there's lots of examples like that. So it's on the cards. Whether it happens or not, I'm still not convinced. But everyone I talk to about it is taking it deadly seriously. And as I said, they're talking about launching it next year, which is just hard to envisage, given the runway they have to try and pull off this logistical master plan. But it's definitely on the cards, and it's going to be a very interesting story to follow over the next couple of months.
Yeah, I just wanted to get your opinion on it because that piece that Alex Lowe wrote just piqued my interest because I'd heard obviously about it when the Tyndall stuff first came out, and it just seems so fanciful to me. But the idea that it's gaining real traction, I just thought was interesting. I also thought it was interesting. I saw you in an article about the Nations Championship kind of taking shape. So Ireland are going to be back in Australia next summer. And back in Australia the summer after that for the World Cup. So it's going to be the dry run to end all dry runs. They'll be going into their local restaurants. They'll know the waiters by their first names. They'll know everything about the country.
Yeah, and it could be for 2 games because Japan. So they're going to be drawn. People may have forgotten what the Nations Cup is, but it's basically going to replace the summer tours and November internationals. 3 games against, in Ireland's case, next summer it's going to be New Zealand, Australia, and Japan. England will be playing South Africa, Fiji, and Argentina, and then Ireland will play Argentina, South Africa, and Fiji in November, and England will play the teams Ireland played in this. And then 2 years after that, it'll flip, and Ireland will go to South Africa, Argentina, and potentially Fiji. Although the games against Fiji and Japan, there seem to be put in neutral venues, and that's why Ireland are likely to be playing Japan in Australia. So get 2 weeks in Australia next summer, or Australia's winter, and then over to New Zealand for a test. Now they could play Japan in New Zealand, and I think there's still negotiations ongoing because obviously the Japanese would like to host Ireland in one of their own stadiums and reap the rewards of that. I was talking to the Wales Online guy Ben James earlier. He came from Japan where Wales played and flew to Australia for the series, and he was saying how humid it was in Kobe for that Wales game and how difficult conditions were. So I say Ireland will quite happily come to Australia instead. But
it wouldn't be feasible, Rod. It would be like the Champions Cup with the South African teams. It's not feasible to go from like Sydney to Auckland to Tokyo.
No, well, it's a lot more feasible than going from Fiji to Buenos Aires to Pretoria, which is like three matches on 3 continents. At least like it's a 3 or 4 hour flight, I think, between Sydney and Auckland. And Japan isn't. It's in a similar time zone, so you're right. It's like South Africa, but it's like all this is player welfare stuff. And even Gilpin, the CEO of World Rugby, the other day said like that's always been the challenge with this Nations Series concept or Nations Cup concept. And to be honest, like having just come out of a 3-test series that ended in a dead rubber, I just think it's so sad that we're leaving test series behind. Like I think I'm not sold on Nations Cup. I don't know how well. Like maybe in a year's time when Ireland are competing for it, I'll feel differently about it. But right now, I'm not a big fan of the idea. I think it's overwrought. It's trying to fix a problem that's not necessarily there, and we'll see. Like I'll give it a chance when it comes around. But I've never really found it that appealing. They don't know what the promotion relegation element of it is. There's all sorts of things that still haven't been worked out, and it's supposed to be kicking off in less than a year's time. So I'm a bit skeptical on it, but it's on the horizon. It's already been agreed. I just need to figure out the kind of actual logistics of it. I think the launch it's probably going to be announced in the next month or 2. They're still working on it. Kind of word will be handed over the running of it to 6 Nations and Sanzar, the body that runs the Rugby Championship. So they're working out the kind of commercial deals, the TV rights, and also where these games will be played. Because at the moment, it looks like Fiji are going to play games in France, which kind of suits them because their players are largely based in France. But obviously deprives the people of Suva and the people of Fiji from seeing their team play against a top-tier nation in a competitive match, which kind of defeats the purpose of the whole thing.
Just to finish up with a couple of quick lines questions, because I know you've a flight to catch in a couple of minutes. You mentioned Bundy Aki telling that story earlier about his wife dramatically giving birth and the media manager kind of perched on his shoulder. Like that seems to have been a recurring theme of this tour, this media relations, the Lions relations with, I suppose, Australia at large, maybe. Like how has that ultimately played out over the course of the tour? Like has it been a kind of a fractious and kind of somewhat disappointing relationship between media, team, fans, team Australia? How would you assess that whole kind of mix?
Yeah, like I do know that people probably roll their eyes when they hear media people giving out about access, and I understand that. And some of the player interviews that we've gotten over here have been brilliant. Like that, even in the last week, Jack Honan after the first test, Dan Sheehan in midweek, Tyke Furlong in midweek, and Bundyaki after the game, all delivered really good, interesting interviews, and we got loads of space for them, and they seem to be very widely read, and that was fantastic. It helped that they'd won the series, so they're all in good form. Before, like, I think it's kind of about what your expectation of the Lions is, and Andy Farrell took the view early on, as I understand it, that the Lions is basically a failed rugby franchise. That it's a losing team. They go over, they play games, they largely lose series, and he wanted to make it a high performing elite unit that toured Australia unbeaten, was remembered for its rugby, and brought kind of high performance standards to the Lions. And as a result of that, they took a very streamlined approach to everything they did. And say after matches, they really didn't stick around long and chat to the players from the opposition. They were out. There was no meals after games. All the games were quite late, but there was no kind of sticking around. You swapped jerseys, and the Lions were on the bus. Like they barely had time for a mix zone. Everything was hurried because they had to get on the bus back to the hotel, where they kind of went for a night out on their own. But they didn't really do anything with the oppositions they played against. There was limited community engagement, and what was done was largely, is in my view, done for social media purposes and for the benefit of their documentary. They did do some. I'm not saying they didn't do anything. They did visit some, but even like they were in schools, and some of the schools would host the Springboks regularly, and the Springboks would let all the kids come down and watch training. But the Lions were like, absolutely not. And maybe once they'd done all their stuff, they might bring the first team down for the last few minutes. But the schools, I didn't get the sense that the schools had a lot of love for them that they visited. Um, the media side, like there's just this growing conflict between teams' social media and the traditional media, and I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon, because why would you talk to us when you could put your own message out and not have anyone asking awkward questions? Um, and like that's just the reality of modern life, and that's fine. But I do think people, certainly our listeners, for example, will I think appreciate an independent voice and a different experience that's not having to go through commercial managers and getting sign off and all that sort of stuff as well. So, but you just find yourself like you kind of find yourself just very much on the outside, kind of being kept at a distance, and like kind of finding out 2 weeks later that one of the players' wives had gave birth. That's the kind of thing that years ago you would have heard about, you would have come out, but it gives you a different, you go off and do interviews with other people, and you do try and find interesting stories beyond the Lions tour, and it gives you a certain, probably an extra level of independence as well, and you do your best to cover it as best you can, and like you get on with it. But in terms of the Lions, like, yeah, I don't think they were particularly warmly received, because I don't think Australia felt like they knew them at all, beyond what they got through their phones, because everything was kind of done for social media. Maybe that's the modern world, but I think there's a bit of a more of a balance to be struck in terms of that high performance unit, but also getting out there and experiencing the country a bit more, and letting the country experience you. And I think maybe towards the end, when they weren't traveling every 4 days, there was a bit more time for that. And certainly I got much more of a sense of the players being enjoying it, and Andy Farrell enjoying it a bit more once they kind of went from that series of midweek games to this, to kind of one a week, and being in one base. Like some of this stuff would leave you a little bit cold, and you just wonder how much how fondly, like, they were kind of here to save Australian rugby in a way, and they have done financially. It's been a commercial juggernaut. It's as I said earlier, like 500,000 people went through the doors. Loads of people traveled over, and they had a great time, and the players seemed to have a great time, and we had a great time covering them. So, um, there's everyone goes home happy to a degree, but there's definitely a sense that they didn't quite fulfill the more traditional part of the bargain into the mix. But that's the decisions they made, and I think nothing summed it up more than maybe the way they David Nucifora threw the towel over the camera in the dressing room, um, as we waited the restart of the game on Saturday night. So, yeah, it was probably one of the less fulfilling sides of it, but that's the decisions they made, and I guess their legacy will probably, in Australia, maybe be tarnished a little bit by that.
Yeah, well, the point you make on the travel portion for the first section of the tour, I think, is a good one because it's hard to get into a flow of anything really. Like every time we spoke to you, you were coming to us from a different city. Like I saw, it's as you say, like at least in the test series, you're bedded down for the week, and maybe the relationships could be a little more kind of formed, and you can get a little more from people. But it was funny. We had Will Kelleher on before Leinster Northampton, and we looked a bit ahead to the Lions tour, and he said, I'm just looking forward to getting to know some of the Irish players a bit more. And I was like, well, I hate to break it to you, but that's not going to happen. Like you're not going to get much access to him, and I think that's how it played out. Last thing I want to ask you, Rod, like I think you've been to Australia before on the Lions tour, you've been to South Africa and New Zealand. Like, what tweaks or changes do you think the Lions should make to the schedule, to any other aspects of the tour? Like, people have maybe said, should there be a cap on when you can call up players? Because I think a lot of people are dissatisfied with, just bringing in guys to pad the bench for the last warm up game. There's been talk of maybe introducing a few more international teams to the schedule if in a case like Australia, the warm teams aren't particularly strong. Like, what tweaks would you like to see made going forward? Maybe even a full Tour de France. That's one that's bandied about a lot. One I'd love to see at some stage. Anything jumping out to you, as another Lions tour comes to a close?
I just don't see France happening. I'd love it to happen, but like there's already too many games for players in France, and like they sent the shadow team down to New Zealand this summer. So you're looking at the Lions going to a country that can't take the July window seriously. So are the Lions going to, how are they going to play top 14 teams when the top 14 goes on forever? I think logistically, sure, it'd be lucrative and it'd be very enjoyable and it'd be great for fans to be able to go to it, because like one of the reasons the crowd here was so old was because it was expensive. They're definitely going to come back to Australia. It's too lucrative, and the sporting infrastructure is superb. Every one of the stadiums, apart from the one in Canberra, which was a bit more rustic, but that was no harm either to get something different. Although it made our job a bit harder because the Wi-Fi didn't work. They were so like they're just amazing. Like the stadia across the country, the fans love coming here. As I said, there's people already talking about coming back in 2 years' time for a World Cup, and I'm sure Ireland fans will travel next summer if they get a chance. So the rugby side is the side you have to fix, and like, can the Lions really say to Australia, we're going to come over, but we're not going to play against your teams? We want to play against Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga. Like, maybe they can because they're so worth so much money to them, but I don't know if they're going to actually be that different. I suppose the challenge for Australian rugby is that they'll be in a better shape in 12 years' time. Like, it's a long way away to forecast. And like the South African teams weren't that competitive 4 years ago in the build-up. I know COVID played a part, but they were fairly poor build-up games 4 years ago in very
But
different
even getting South
scenarios. And
Africa
obviously,
A, even having South Africa A,
yeah.
I suppose
Well, the
beats you up.
Lions, the
Like,
Lions stopped the Lions
yeah.
stopped Australia putting Australia A into that AUNZ window, or the Melbourne window. So that was the Lions didn't want it like that much of a test. So they gave out about not having a test. But even when Pete Samu was called up for that AUNZ guard, they were like, for the First Nations game, they were like, well, no, you can't have him. That's not part of the agreement. And again, that's another thing that didn't feel like it was in the spirit. It might not have been contractually within the laws of what you're able to do, but like, turn a blind eye, let the guy play and take, and face the Lions twice. And that jarred. And yeah, if you can find a way to stop the project player, or send the project player, but the geography 6 scenario, or the geography 4, or whatever they were in this one. I mean, Andy Farrell ostensibly called up Jamie Osborne and Thomas Clarkson for their development as Leinster and Ireland players more pertinently. If Warren Gatlin did that, I think people would be upset about it. So that's something that I think the Lions I think they were next cabs off the rank in their positions, but at the same time, where they needed, probably Osborne was. Clarkson was needed for that one game, but he sent the Scots home and he kept Clarkson around until the end. And like, that's gonna be great for him next year that he's coming back as a Lion and having this experience. But again, is that in the spirit of the Lions? I think if Gregor Townsend brought a lot, two Scots and 4 Irish and sent the Irish home after 4 days, I don't think we'd be happy about that. So like I spoke to Joe a couple of weeks ago about whether you have to get a neutral coach in, someone like O'Gara, who is coaching in a different environment and comes in and just picks what he thinks are the best rather than pick a bulk of one country. But I just think in the modern world that's unavoidable. That it's going to be Andy Farrell next time if he wants it, unless things fall apart with Ireland, which I don't foresee happening. And he's going to do it his way, and his way is to kind of build cohesion, And if the Irish players are the best players, he'll pick the Irish players because he doesn't care. He's not going to pick Welsh players for the sake of it. He's not going to pick Sione Tuipulotu because the match is in Melbourne. He's going to be cutthroat and ruthless because he's a high performance kind of guy, and he that's what he was here to win. So it's a flawed concept, but it's a great concept, and the good outweighs the bad. I don't know if this is coming across as negative, but like I
No,
still think
like
it was a great couple of weeks.
it's just a few tweaks. Like you made the point earlier, like you can't discount the experience of everyone who goes over there and all the traveling fans. But nor do I think you can discount the experience of all the fans who watch as well from afar. Like we were covering it from afar. We obviously weren't lucky enough to be over there, but like there's a long warm up period, and if the games are like they were for the most part this time, I just think tweaks need to be made. But I think there's an acceptance that there will be maybe a Fiji or a Japan shoehorned in. Maybe you play the best two franchises instead of playing all four or something like that. I think with a couple of tweaks just to, because it should be from start to finish a really compelling project. Now, at least in New Zealand, we know the teams are a lot better. Those games were really good the last time, like the Blues game with Sonny Bill Williams, the Crusaders game against a fairly stacked Crusaders team were really good. So I think those tweaks hopefully will be made whenever 12 years time comes. And there's already talk about a money spinning game against France to kick things off potentially before they go to New Zealand. So maybe the French will be
they're talking about going to Vegas, like, so you just who knows? Like, again, this R360 thing is just could change the whole shape of, there could be no players in New Zealand the next time around, like, so like the whole thing is, rugby is in a very delicate place at the moment, and I think it's very hard, just much like the media landscape, it's very hard to project what it's going to be like in 4 years' time. And I just hope that, like, I don't see the lines falling away or kind of being left behind, but at the same time, like, it's up to people to protect it, and I think the numbers are too good. It's too important to the home unions, for want of a better phrase, but also the countries they tour. I mean, Brisbane made something like 60 million in the weekend that of the first test, in kind of people, hotels, all the stuff that all goes around games. It was incredible. Like, it's just it's a traveling circus that kind of benefits both sides, and it's it hasn't been a vintage tour by any means, but it's still, I think, a worthwhile exercise, and that's it can be improved, and they need to work on it, and they need to work on it from both sides, and definitely the schedule and the kind of warm-up games is part of that, because I didn't get the sense it was drawing people in until the test series, and the test series kind of was over before it really got going, which was a shame.
Yeah, I agree with all you said there, Rod. And to be fair, the test series did deliver. I know the first half was a damn squib, but after that, we got like 2.5 really compelling games that I think is going to be the abiding memory. But as you say, it's just about tweaking a few things to maybe sustain that interest across the whole series. Because it started with a bang against Argentina in Dublin. We were raving about that atmosphere. We were raving about the test atmosphere. It should be a little bit more competitive in the meantime. But for now, Rod, you've been doing Trojan work for 6 weeks in Australia. Enjoy your flight home. Hopefully, we haven't kept you too long. Hopefully, you can make it. And we'll see you again, I suppose, in a couple of weeks' time when it all kicks off again.
Hopefully, I don't end up in Haneda or somewhere by mistake. Hopefully, I get on the right one, because I'm fairly bamboozled. But no, it's been great, and thanks to everyone for listening over the last couple of weeks, and enjoyed doing them. See you soon.